For dinner, I love to make sheet pan meals. In fact, it's one of my absolute go-tos. I usually have 1 or 2 sheet pans that I just layer with a bunch of ingredients that my family will eat, and there you go. You have an entire meal ready in just minutes. So one of my absolute favorites personally is this chicken and Parmesan, garlic, vegetables that we have on a sheet pan. The chicken gets crispy. The vegetables are coated in Parmesan and garlic. Everything tastes delicious. And I choose to use 2 of my favorites and my kids' favorites, which is asparagus and potatoes. So what I like is the potatoes tend to get eaten by my husband and kids a little bit more, and I tend to go a little more for the asparagus. So that's what I try to do, is think about how can I make a meal that my entire family will eat? And the chicken, everybody loves. So in order to make this recipe, I have about a ½ pound of potatoes, a bundle of asparagus, 1 teaspoon of garlic powder, a ½ teaspoon of salt, and 1 tablespoon of Italian seasoning. We also have 1 cup of Parmesan, 1 cup of breadcrumbs, a pound or so of chicken, 2 eggs, and a 1/4 cup of buttermilk or milk of choice. So what I'm gonna do is I have 2 bowls here, and I'm kind of just gonna do a breading station. And I'm gonna start with my seasonings. You can do any kind of seasonings that you like. For this, if you don't like Italian seasoning, onion powder would be a really good neutral bland seasoning. And I say that because if I were making this for my kids, I would not use Italian seasoning. In that case, I would probably do dried onion powder, and that is a really flavorful spice that would be really nice in this dish. Then I'm gonna do the Parmesan cheese and the breadcrumbs. And that's all you need for the dry breading. And I'm just gonna kind of mix this together with my hands here. Okay, so that looks great. Now we're gonna do 2 eggs and then buttermilk or milk of choice. And if you don't have buttermilk on hand, I always like to do just a little bit of milk with like a teaspoon of white vinegar. And really the only difference between milk and buttermilk is the vinegar, and that just helps tenderize the meat. So that's usually why it's used when you're gonna bread chicken or pork or a different cut of meat, is it just helps tenderize the meat. Now, before we bread the chicken, what I'm gonna do is I'm going to set these aside, and I'm gonna work on the veggies because we're gonna use some of the seasoned breading Parmesan mixture on the veggies. Okay, so I have some of my potatoes already diced, and you can see you just wanna dice them about into 4s depending on the size of your potato. The real important thing is to make sure that they're evenly sized as best as you can, because that will make sure that they cook evenly. That looks good. Then when it comes to asparagus, a good tip for figuring out where to cut this is to kind of just let it naturally break. So that's usually about where you're gonna get a really nice tender piece of asparagus. If you don't do that and you kind of just guess, sometimes some of this stalk will be really grainy or woody. It's kind of hard to chew through. So in order to get the tender part of the asparagus, that's a nice tip, is you just break it naturally. And then you take the rest of the asparagus and you kind of set it on the cutting board next to that piece that you cut. And then you cut it down in similar length. So there you go. And if you want to use up the ends of these asparagus, you could cut a little bit more off, and you could add it to a soup and maybe just puree it or blend it, so that way you're not wasting all that asparagus. So we're gonna just kind of spread these out over the pan. And then we're gonna top it with some of this Parmesan topping. Okay, so now all that's left to do is to bread the chicken and add it to the pan. So we have about a pound or so of chicken, and we're gonna dip it first, just a few pieces at a time, in the wet, and then we're gonna go into the dry ingredients. Then we're just gonna add the chicken to the pan. Just kind of tuck it into the veggies. just like that. And you don't want to overcrowd the chicken in the dry ingredients, just a few pieces at a time. All right, and this is ready to go in the oven, 425 degrees for 25 to 30 minutes.